So hello, this is David Arthur, Agenda Truth. Welcome back. Today I'm going to be reading a Toxicology Letter, Adverse Health Effects of 5G Mobile Networking Technology Under Real-Life Conditions. This is Toxicology Letters 323, 2020, 35-40. You can get this at Science Direct. I'm sure there's other places that you can find it. The journal homepage is www.elsevir.com/locate/Toxlet, which is spelt Toxlet. Authors are Ronald N. Kostoff, Paul Heroux, Michael Ashner, and Aristides Tsaktakis. Research affiliate of the School of Public Policy and Georgia Institute of Technology, Toxicology and Health Effects of Electromagnetism in McGill University, Molecular Pharmacology, the Einstein Center of Toxicology in the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, Laboratory of Toxicology, Medical School, University of Crete, and the Department of Analytical Toxicology, Pharmaceutical Chemistry, and Pharmacognosy in Sechenov University, Russia. There's a graphical abstract here. Adverse health effects of wireless radiation on humans. Under the cancer section, there's metabolic disturbance, discomfort symptoms. Neurodegeneration is reactive oxygen species generation and sensory disorders. Infertility, genotoxicity and carcinogenicity, sleep disorders, neurobehavioral, immunotoxicity and inflammation, congenital abnormalities, apoptosis and necrosis, precancerous conditions, cardiovascular. So you have cancer, neurodegeneration, infertility, neurobehavioral problems, and cardiovascular issues. Keywords in this gives you an idea of what they're going to talk about when you read these keywords. It's electromagnetic fields, wireless radiation, non-ionizing radiation, mobile networking technology, 5G, adverse health effects, toxicology, toxic stimuli combinations, synergistic effects, combined effects, systemic effects, and real-life simulation, which is one of the most important, interesting themes of this article. The abstract. This article identifies adverse effects of non-ionizing, non-visible radiation, hereafter called wireless radiation, reported in the premier biomedical literature. It emphasizes that most of the laboratory experiments conducted to date are not designed to identify the more severe adverse effects reflective of the real-life operating environment in which wireless radiation systems operate. Many experiments do not include pulsing and modulation of the carrier signal. The vast majority do not account for synergistic adverse effects of other toxic stimuli, such as chemical and biological, acting in concert with the wireless radiation. This article also presents evidence that the nascent 5G mobile networking technology will affect not only the skin and eyes, as commonly believed, but will have adverse systemic effects as well. Introduction. Wireless communications have been expanding globally at an exponential rate. The latest embedded version of mobile networking technology is called 4G, 4th generation, and the next version, called 5G, 5th generation, is in the early implementation stage. Neither 4G nor 5G have been tested for safety in credible real life scenarios. Alarmingly, many of the studies conducted in more benign environments show harmful effects from this radiation. The present article overviews the medical and biological studies that have been performed to date relative to effects from wireless radiation, and shows why these studies are deficient relative to safety. However, even in the absence of the missing real-life components, such as toxic chemicals and biotoxins, which tend to exacerbate the adverse effects of the wireless radiation, the literature shows there is much valid reason for concern about potential adverse health effects from both 4G and 5G technology. The studies on wireless radiation health effects reported in the literature should be viewed as extremely conservative, substantially underestimating the adverse impacts of this new technology. Wireless radiation and the electromagnetic spectrum. This section overviews the electromagnetic spectrum and delineates the parts of the spectrum on which this article will focus. The electromagnetic spectrum encompasses the entire span of electromagnetic radiation, including ionizing radiation, gamma rays, X-rays, and extreme ultraviolet, with wavelengths below 10 to minus 7 meters and frequencies above 3 times 10 to the power 15 Hz. Non-ionizing visible radiation, wavelengths from 4 times 10 to the power 7 meters to 7 times 10 to the power minus 7 meters, and frequencies between 4.2 times 10 to the power 14 Hz and 7.7 times 10 to the power 14 Hz. Non-ionizing and non-visible radiation. Short wavelength radio waves and microwaves with wavelengths between 10 to minus 3 meters and 10 to 5 meters and frequencies between 3 times 10 to 11 to 3 times 10 to 3 Hertz, and long waves ranging between 10 to the power 5 meters and 10 to the power 8 meters and frequencies ranging between 3 times 10 to the power 3 and 3 Hertz. How are these frequencies used in practice? The low frequencies, 3 Hz to 300 kHz, are used for electrical power line transmission, 60 Hz in the US, as well as maritime and submarine navigation and communications. Medium frequencies, 300 kHz to 900 MHz, are used for AM, FM, TV broadcasts in North America. Lower microwave frequencies, 900 MHz to 5 GHz, are used for telecommunications such as microwave devices, communications, radio astronomy, mobile and cell phones, and wireless local area networks. Higher microwave frequencies, 5 GHz to 300 GHz, are used for radar and proposed for microwave Wi-Fi and will be used for high-performance 5G. Terahertz frequencies, 300 GHz to 3000 GHz, are used increasingly for image to supplement X-rays in some medical and security scanning applications. In the present study of wireless radiation health effects, the frequency spectrum ranging from 3 Hz to 300 GHz is covered, with particular emphasis on the high-frequency communications component ranging from 1 GHz to 300 GHz. Why was this part of the spectrum selected? Previous reviews of wireless radiation health effects found that pulsed electromagnetic fields, PEMF, applied for relatively short periods of time could sometimes be used for therapeutic purposes, whereas chronic exposure to electromagnetic fields, EMF, in the power frequency range around 60 Hz and microwave frequency range 1 GHz 10 GHz, tended to result in detrimental health effects. Given present concerns about the rapid expansion of 5G communication systems, which are projected to use mainly the higher microwave frequencies part of the spectrum in the highest performance, aka high band mode, in the absence of adequate and rigorous safety testing, more emphasis will be placed on the communication frequencies in this document. In ancient times, sunlight and its lunar reflections provided the bulk of the visible spectrum for human beings, with fire a distant second and lightning a more distant third. Now, many varieties of artificial light, incandescent, fluorescent, and light-emitting diode, LEDs, have replaced the sun as the main supplier of visible radiation during waking hours. Additionally, EMF radiations from other parts of the non-ionising, non-visible spectrum have become ubiquitous in daily life, such as from wireless computing and telecommunications. In the last 2 or 3 decades, the explosive growth in the cellular telephone industry has placed many residences in metropolitan areas within less than a mile of a cell tower. Future implementation of the next generation of mobile networking technology, 5G, will increase the cell tower densities by an order of magnitude. Health concerns have been raised about wireless radiation from 1. Mobile communication devices, 2. Occupational exposure, 3. Residential exposure, 4. Wireless networks in homes, businesses and schools, 5. Automotive radar, and 6. Other non-ionising EMF radiation sources, such as smart meters and Internet of Things. Section 4. Demonstrated biological and health effects from prior generations of wireless networking technology. There have been 2 major types of studies performed to ascertain biological and health effects of wireless radiation: laboratory and epidemiology. The laboratory tests performed provided the best scientific understanding of the effects of wireless radiation, but did not reflect the real-life environment in which wireless radiation systems operate. For example, exposure to chemicals, toxic chemicals, biotoxins, other forms of toxic radiation, etc. There are 3 main reasons the laboratory tests failed to reflect real-life exposure conditions for human beings. First, the laboratory tests have been performed mainly on animals, especially rats and mice. Because of physiological differences between small animals and human beings, there have been continual concerns about extrapolating small animal results to human beings. Additionally, while inhaled or ingested substances can be scaled from laboratory experiments on small animals to human beings relatively straightforwardly, radiation may be more problematic. For non-ionising radiation, penetration depth is a function of frequency, tissue, and other parameters. Radiation could penetrate much deeper into a small animal's interior than similar wavelength radiation in humans, because of the much smaller animal size. Different organs and tissues would be affected with different levels of power density. Second, the typical incoming EMF signal for many or most laboratory tests performed in the past consisted of a single carrier wave frequency. The lower frequency, superimposed signal containing the information was not always included. This omission may be important, as Panagopoulos states, "It is important to note that except for the radio frequency microwave carrier frequency, extremely low frequencies, abbreviated as ELFs, which are 0 to 3000 Hz, are always present in all telecommunication EMFs in the form of pulsing and modulation." There is significant evidence indicating that the effects of telecommunication EMFs on living organisms are mainly due to the included ELFs. While around 50% of the studies employing simulated exposures do not find any effects, studies employing real-life exposures from commercially available devices display an almost 100% consistency in showing adverse effects. These effects may be exacerbated further with 5G. With every new generation of telecommunication devices, the amount of information transmitted each moment is increased, resulting in higher variability and complexity of the signals, with the living cells even more unable to adapt. So that's a very important point to remember. No matter what frequency we're dealing with the EMFs coming from these devices, you always have extremely low frequencies, 0 to 3000 Hz, in the form of pulsing and modulation present. Third, These laboratory experiments typically involved one stressor, toxic stimulus, and were performed under pristine conditions. This contradicts real-life exposures, where humans are exposed to multiple toxic stimuli in parallel or over time. It looks like here some papers are quoted. So the next one, in perhaps 5% of the cases reported in the wireless radiation literature, a second stressor, mainly a biological or chemical toxic stimulus, was added to the wireless radiation stressor to ascertain whether additive, synergistic, potentiative, or antagonistic effects were generated by the combination. Combination experiments are extremely important because when other toxic stimuli are considered in combination, either with each other or with wireless radiation, the synergies tend to enhance the adverse effects of each stimulus in isolation. This was shown in several studies that evaluated the cumulative effects of chronic exposure to low doses of xenobiotics in combination. So it's a more holistic approach when you take into account other toxic stimuli. And that's what leads to it being a more real-life scenario. For those combinations that include wireless radiation, combined exposure to toxic stimuli and wireless radiation translates into much lower levels of tolerance for each toxic stimulus in the combination relative to its exposure levels that produce adverse effects in isolation. Accordingly, the exposure limits for wireless radiation, when examined in combination with other potentially toxic stimuli, would be far lower for safety purposes than those derived from wireless radiation exposures in isolation. Thus, almost all of the wireless radiation laboratory experiments that have been performed to date are flawed and limited with respect to showing the full adverse impact of the wireless radiation that would be expected under real-life conditions. Either 1, non-inclusion of signal information, or 2, using only single stressors only tends to underestimate the seriousness of the adverse effects from wireless radiation. Excluding both of these phenomena from experiments, as was done in the vast majority of the reported wireless radiation health effects studies, tends to amplify this underestimation substantially. Thus, the results reported in the biomedical literature should be viewed as 1, extremely conservative, and 2, the very low floor of the seriousness of the adverse effects from wireless radiation, not the ceiling. In contrast to the controlled, pristine environments that characterize the wireless radiation animal laboratory experiments, the wireless radiation epidemiology studies carried out to date typically involved human beings who had been subjected to myriad known and unknown stresses prior to and during the study. The real-life human exposure levels from cell tower studies, reported by Kostoff and Lau in 2017, that showed increased cancer incidence were orders of magnitude lower than those exposure levels generated in the recent highly funded National Toxicology Program animal laboratory studies, Melnick 2019. We believe We believe the inclusion of real-world effects in the cell tower studies accounted for the orders of magnitude exposure level decreases that were associated with the increased cancer incidence. The laboratory tests were conducted under controlled conditions not reflective of real life, while the epidemiology studies were performed in the presence of many stresses, known and unknown, reflective of real life. The myriad toxic stimuli exposure levels of the epidemiology studies were, for the most part, uncontrolled. A vast literature published over the past 60 years shows adverse effects from wireless radiation applied in isolation or as part of a combination with other toxic stimuli. Extensive reviews of wireless radiation-induced biological and health effects have been published, and there's a big list of them here, and I'll show you those at the end in where the references are. In aggregate, for the high frequency radio frequency part of the spectrum, these reviews show that radio frequency radiation below the FCC guidelines can result in carcinogenicity, genotoxicity, mutagenicity, teratogenicity, neurodegenerative diseases, neurobehavioral problems, adverse impacts on the neural, circulatory, immune, endocrine and skeletal systems. Under neurobehavioral problems, we have autism, reproductive problems, pregnancy outcomes, excessive reactive oxygen species, oxidative stress, inflammation, apoptosis, blood-brain barrier disruption, pineal gland and melatonin production, sleep disturbance, headache, irritability, fatigue, concentration difficulties, depression, dizziness, tinnitus, burning and flushed skin, digestive disturbance, tremor, cardiac irregularities. All of this, I'll read them a bit before. In aggregate, for the high frequency, radio frequency part of the spectrum, these reviews show that radio frequency radiation below the FCC guidelines can result in those diseases that I just mentioned. From this perspective, RF is a highly pervasive cause of disease! Exclamation mark. The response from industry has been that no mechanism could explain the biological action of non-thermal and non-ionizing EM fields, yet reports of clear perturbations of biological systems at levels near or even below 1000 microwatts per meter squared by Initiative 2019 were explained by perturbations in electron and proton transfers supporting ATP production in mitochondria. And mitochondria is seriously important. Exposed to RF or ELF signals. Sorry about that, I got something in my throat there. To obtain another perspective on the full spectrum adverse effects from wireless radiation, a query was run on Medline to retrieve representative records associated with adverse EMF effects, mainly but not solely radio frequency. Over 5,400 records were retrieved. Wow. And the leading medical subject headings, MESH, extracted. The categories of adverse impacts from both approaches match quite well. The adverse health effects range from myriad feelings of discomfort to life-threatening diseases. So it's called MESH, which is Medical Subject Headings. The full list of MESH headings associated with this retrieval is shown in Appendix 1 of Kostoff 2019. The interested reader can ascertain what other diseases or symptoms were included. The 5,400 plus references retrieved are shown in Appendix 2 of Kostoff 2019. Section 5. What types of biological and health effects can be expected from 5G wireless networking technology? The potential 5G adverse effects derive from the intrinsic nature of the radiation and its interaction with tissue and target structures. 4G networking technology was associated mainly with carrier frequencies in the range of 1 to 2.5 GHz, cell phones and Wi-Fi. The wavelength of 1 GHz radiation is 30 centimeters, and the penetration depth in human tissue is a few centimeters. In its highest performance, high band mode, 5G networking technology is mainly associated with carrier frequencies at least an order of magnitude greater than the 4G frequencies. Although, as stated previously, ELFs, extremely low frequencies, 0 to 3000 Hz, are always present in all telecommunication EMFs in the form of pulsing and modulation. Penetration depths for the carrier frequency component of high-band 5G wireless radiation will be on the order of a few millimeters. At these wavelengths, one can expect resonance phenomena with small-scale human structures. Additionally, numerical simulations of millimeter wave radiation resonances with insects showed a general increase in absorbed RF power at and above 6 GHz, in comparison to the absorbed RF power below 6 GHz. A shift of 10% of the incident power density to frequencies above 6 GHz was predicted to lead to an increase in absorbed power between 3 to 370%. The common wisdom, in inverted commas, wisdom, presented in the literature and media is that if there are adverse impacts resulting from high-band 5G, the main impacts will be focused on near-surface phenomena, such as skin cancer, cataracts, and other skin conditions. However, there is evidence that biological responses to millimeter wave irradiation can be initiated within the skin, and the subsequent systemic signaling in the skin can result in physiological effects on the nervous system, heart, and immune system. And that's found by Russell in 2018. Additionally, consider the following reference. Zalubovskaya, 1977. This is one of the many translations of articles produced in the former Soviet Union on wireless radiation. Also see reviews of Soviet research on this topic by McCree, Kositsky, and Glaser and Dodge. I like the name Dodge. On page 57 of the PDF link, the article by Zalubovskaya addresses biological effects of millimeter radio waves. Zalubovskaya ran experiments using power fluxes of 10 million microwatts per square meter, which is the ICNIRP guidelines, by the way. The FCC, Federal Communications Commission, guideline limit for the general public today in the USA, and frequencies on the order of 60 GHz, not only was skin impacted adversely, but also heart, liver, kidney, spleen tissue as well, and blood and bone marrow properties. These results reinforce the conclusion of Russell quoted above, that systemic results may occur from millimeter wave radiation. To re-emphasize for Zalubovskaya's experiments, the incoming signal was unmodulated carrier frequency only, and the experiment was single stressor only. Thus, the expected real-world results when human beings are impacted, the signals are pulsed and modulated, and there is exposure to many toxic stimuli. This would be far more serious and would be initiated at lower and perhaps much lower wireless radiation power fluxes. The Zalubovskaya paper was published in 1977. The referenced version was classified in 1977 by USA authorities and declassified in 2012. What national security concerns caused it and the other papers in the linked PDF reference to be classified for 35 years until declassification in 2012? Exactly what I was thinking. Other papers on this topic with similar findings were published in the USSR and the USA at that time, or even earlier, but many never saw the light of day, both in the USSR and the USA. It appears that the potentially damaging effects of millimeter wave radiation on the skin and other major systems in the body have been recognized for well over 40 years, yet today's discourse only revolves around the possibility of modest potential effects on the skin and perhaps cataracts from millimeter wave wireless radiation. In other words, it's pathetic. What is the consensus on adverse effects from wireless radiation? Not all studies of wireless radiation have shown adverse effects. For example, consider potential genotoxic effects of mobile phone radiation. A study investigating the effect of mobile phone use on genomic instability of the human oral cavity's mucosa cells concluded Mobile phone use did not lead to significantly increased frequency of micronuclei. So this is talking about the consensus, right? Conversely, a 2017 study investigated buccal cell preparations for genomic instability and found the frequency of micronuclei, nuclear buds, basal, karyoretic, karyolytic, pycnotic, and condensed chromatin cells were highly significantly increased in mobile phone users. Also, a 2017 study to ascertain the effect of cell phone emitted radiations on the orofacial structures concluded that cell phone emitted radiation causes nuclear abnormalities of the oral mucosal cells. Sorry, I'll read that clearer. Cell phone emitted radiation causes nuclear abnormalities of the oral mucosal cells. Further, a 2016 study to explore the effects of mobile phone radiation on the MN frequency in oral mucosal cells concluded the number of micronucleated cells over 1,000 exfoliated buccal mucosal cells, I don't know what these cells are, I'm sorry to say, was found to be significantly increased in high mobile phone users group than the low mobile phone users group. Finally, a study aimed at investigating the health effects of Wi-Fi exposure concluded long-term exposure to Wi-Fi may lead to adverse effects such as neurodegenerative diseases as observed by a significant alteration on ACHE gene expression and some neurobehavioral parameters associated with brain damage. There are many possible reasons to explain this lack of consensus. There may be windows in parameter space where adverse effects occur, and operation outside these windows would show A, no effects, or B, hormetic effects, or C, therapeutic effects. For example, if information content of the signal is a strong contributor to adverse health effects, then experiments that involve only the carrier frequencies may be outside the window where adverse health effects occur. Alternatively, in this specific example, the carrier signal and the information signal could be viewed as a combination of potentially toxic stimuli, where the adverse effects of each component are enabled because of the synergistic effects of the combination. As another example, an adverse health impact on one strain of rodent was shown for combination of 50 Hz EMF and DMBA, while no adverse health impact was shown on another rodent strain for the same toxic stimuli combination. From a higher order combination perspective, if genetic abnormalities and differences are viewed conceptually as potentially equivalent to a toxic stimulus for combination purposes, then a synergistic three-constituent combination of 50 Hz, EMF, DMBA, and genetics was required to produce adverse health impacts in the above experiment. If these results can be extrapolated across species, then human beings could exhibit different responses to the same electromagnetic stimuli based on their unique genetic predispositions. I'm just going to have a look at what DMBA is, as it didn't actually explain that. So I'm just checking what that means. DMBA. In science and medicine, dimethylbenzoanthracene. Really? What else does it mean? maybe that's one of the toxic stressors they used. Okay. 50 Hz EMF and DMBA altogether was required to produce adverse health impacts in that one experiment. Okay. More reasons to explain the lack of consensus. Research quality could be poor and adverse effects were overlooked, or the research team could have had a preconceived agenda where finding no adverse effects from wireless radiation was the objective of the study. For example, studies have shown that industry-funded research of wireless radiation adverse health effects is far more likely to show no effects than funding from non-industry sources. Isn't that a surprise? Studies in disciplines other than wireless radiation have shown that for products of high military, commercial and political sensitivity, researchers and organizations are hired to publish articles that conflict with the credible science and therefore create doubt as to whether the product of interest is harmful. And we've definitely seen that in the past. Create doubt, and then you can continue selling your product because everyone's battling with a sea of arguments, a lack of consensus. Unfortunately, given the strong dependence of the civilian and military economies on wireless radiation, incentives for identifying adverse health effects from wireless radiation are minimal and disincentives are many. These perverse incentives apply not only to the sponsors of research and development, but to the performers as well. Even the gold standard for research credibility, independent replication of research results, is questionable in politically, commercially, and military sensitive areas like wireless radiation safety, where the accelerated implementation goals of most wireless radiation research sponsors, government and industry, are aligned. It is imperative that highly objective evaluators, with minimal conflicts of interest, play a central role, ensuring that rigorous safety standards for wireless radiation systems are met before wide-scale implementation is allowed. So, conclusions. One second. Wireless radiation offers the promise of improved remote sensing, improved communications and data transfer, and improved connectivity. Unfortunately, there is a large body of data from laboratory and epidemiological studies showing that previous and present generations of wireless networking technology have significant adverse health impacts. Much of this data was obtained under conditions not reflective of real life. When real-life considerations are added, such as 1. Including the information content of signals along with 2. The carrier frequencies, and 3. Including other toxic stimuli in combination with the wireless radiation, the adverse effects associated with wireless radiation are increased substantially. Superimposing 5G radiation on an already embedded toxic wireless radiation environment will exacerbate the adverse health effects shown to exist. Far more research and testing of potential 5G health effects under real-life conditions is required before further rollout can be justified. And there's a declaration here of competing interest. The authors declare that they have no known competing financial interests or personal relationships that could have appeared to influence the work reported in this paper. And here are the references. Look at that. There are so many references here. And a lot of these names are Greek, actually. And I did hear recently that Greece has said no to 5G, and this may be one of the reasons why. If they're doing much more real-life research, I can see a lot of Greek names there. So there we have it. Let's scroll back to the top. So I just read adverse health effects of 5G mobile networking technology under real-life conditions from Kostov, Heru, Ashner and Tsatakis. Toxicology Letters 323. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you for the next one.